Class 12. Since we have already looked at various layout techniques specifically related to the box model, we're now going to look at creating multi-column layouts. And while there are several methods listed on this page, we're going to be focused in this video on the flex display method. So make sure to click on the link here where it says edit on CodePen, and that will take you to this page right over here. The flex idea is that default elements on a page are going to be displayed as block level elements stacked on top of each other, but when the parent container is set to flex, you can apply various properties to the child of that container. So, for example, over here we have the parent as div and the class is example flex. And we see there's some paragraph information there, but the box that we see right over here with the pink border, that box name is parent. And we see inside of that child parent, there are these items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this pink line around here is telling us that this is part of the div class parent, and each one of these items is items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We see parent has its border set to 5 pixels, solid light coral, and the items, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over here, have a margin around them. They have a background color of gray, a color of white. They're text aligned in the center, and nothing else in there is really new information for you. But what's most important about that is that we see parent has its display property set to flex and its flex direction property set to row. So that's how we can easily create a horizontal navigation bar. If we change flex direction to column, take a look at what happens. All of a sudden, they're stacked on top of each other. And this is going to become very useful when we get into displays for mobile devices and tablet-sized devices and desktops where we're changing that display to a responsive design. So keep in mind that you have to first understand that very often the properties of the child are going to be determined by if the parent has its display property set to flex. Another element that's important about that is when you set the flex property to auto, then the items are going to have as many items as you want in that row. They'll continue to just stack into that one horizontal row. So in a situation where you have 5 links for a navigation system and you've set flex to auto, well then you're going to see 5. If you decided, well, I want to have 6, then you'll see all 6 in that same row. So as you can see here, if I take this row out, this item out, then we see 5 items showing up here and they automatically fill the space. So this is what makes flex so useful, is that as long as you know some basic rules, it's going to really work out nicely. The next thing we're going to talk about is the flex wrap property. So once again, we see the parent is set to display flex, and this time we've set the width to be 90%, and this is the display flex right here, the pink coral, light coral border. We're setting the width to 90 and margin right to auto and margin left to auto. Now here we have flex wrap property, and we've set the flex wrap property to wrap. Well, by default, the flex wrap property is actually set to no wrap. So watch what happens when I change flex wrap for the parent to no wrap. Watch what happens to each of these items which have their basis set to 24%. And the basis means the width. So when we change this back to the default setting of Flex Wrap, watch what happens. All of a sudden, all 15 of those items show up in that one space. Well, that is sometimes useful, but a lot of times, let's say what's most common about this scenario here is that we would be perhaps using this set of items for like images. So, if you wanted to create a gallery. So all of us, you've got each one of these being a picture, right? And then we can set the flex basis to be maybe 24.5%. And we fill that space nicely, and it's less than 100. It's less than 25%, which gives us some room to have some margin around each of those items. But this is a perfect example of when you have on the parent level Flex Wrap set to the non-default setting of wrap, then you can use the flex basis property for each of the items to create a gallery that would really work very handily. The next property that we're going to be looking at is also set at the parent level, and that's the justify content property. Now, there are different values that you can apply to justify content, and justify content is just like it would be in text, like in a paragraph in any kind of Word document. You want to determine where that content starts and where it ends. And if you wanted it centered, well, then you'd use this property, the space evenly property. If you wanted it to start right at the beginning, then you could use this value right over here, the flex start property, and we can see the shift. Or if you use the flex end property, we can see the shift. Or you can use this various space between, space around, and space evenly properties. They're subtly different from each other. You just want to experiment with them. And for example, like space around is going to look just slightly different, right? So those are properties that you can set to the item of the parent, but you're setting it at the parent level. And you can see the flex basis here is set to 15%. That's showing you what kind of spacing you're going to see in the size of each of the items. And then the spacing around each of those items is going to be set at the parent level. The align items property is another very useful one. And we can see that here we've got the parent set to a width of 50%. The margin left, the margin right is keeping that parent in the center. The height is set to 200 pixels and the display is set to flex. But also at the parent level, we're setting the justify content as we had done in the previous example, but we're also setting the align items property. And this align items property has some very important values to consider. You've got stretch, center, start, end, baseline, initial, and inherit. Now, here's the thing. Each of these items only has one single character within each of those item containers. The flex is set to auto, so that means however many items we have in that list, they're going to fill that space evenly because the flex is set to auto on the item level, on the child level, and that's something we talked about earlier. But this align item stretch is talking about the space from the along the vertical axis. So for example, if we didn't have a line item set to stretch, watch what happens. You see that the amount of space that's taken up is the amount of content that's in that container. If we said center, for example, it's going to place all of that content in the center. But again, there's minimal content in each of those items. The only way you get it to stretch and fill the container is when you use the stretch value. So setting align items to stretch is another way that visually you can create containers that are the same size regardless of how much content is in each of those containers. The align content rule is similar to the align items rule, but instead of aligning the boxes, it aligns the lines within those boxes. Okay, I had to make one change there to the flex basis value in the item, because if it's set to flex basis of auto, the align content effect doesn't work. But we can see now with align content set to flex start, the text starts at the top of the screen. If we change that to flex end, it's going to go down to the bottom of the screen. If we set it to center, the lines are going to go into the center of each of those containers. So we can see that we use the align content to design where the text is within each of the containers. But it's important to keep in mind that the item also has to have the flex basis set to something other than auto for that to have an effect. So now we're going to talk about the justify content property. And for the justify content property, the parent has its display property set to flex and has the flex wrap property set to wrap. So because we want to see an example of where we have multiple boxes that spread over several rows, how they're going to be placed. And the justify content property is one way that we can place them in a way that is visually appealing. So again, the item has to have its flex basis set to something other than auto, to a specific percentage value. And because of the fact that there are 3 items on the first line and the flex basis is set to 30% times 3 is 90%, the next item is going to go down below that. The align content property is what's setting the content in there, to the text in there, to be in the center. But it's the justify content property that is setting the box itself in terms of its placement. So right now we see that it's nicely centered. If we wanted to have everything along the left edge, then we could change this to flex start. If we wanted it to be along the right edge, we could set it to flex end. But you can see, again, knowing these properties make design so much more, and I hate to use the pun, but I will, flexible. The next thing we're going to look at is the use of the order property. The order property allows you to change the order of items simply by using the order property value. So what we see here is the parent has its display property set to flex. The items have their size set to auto. So we see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items, but they're not going in the order that you expect. 1, 2, 3, 4 is over here, and 5 is here. Why is that? Because what we're doing is we're taking the item element and we're using the nth child pseudo class and attaching it to that item. Now, you've seen pseudo classes associated with rollover states in the hover property when you roll over a link, as an example. But what we're doing here is we're saying, well, okay, all the items are going to have their flex set to auto, but the nth child is going to have its order set to -1. And we're changing the color for that item as well. So we see in this case, we've set the nth child to be the 4th item. If I change this number to 1, then we're going to see numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So it's the order property set to -1 that makes that element appear before all other elements, even though it might not appear in the HTML first. So for example, again, if I change this to 5, then even though item 5 is below items 1, 2, 3, and 4 here, item 5 shows up first here because it's the nth child value set to 5 and the order set to -1. Now, if we set this order to 0, it's going to show up the way you expect it to be. It's going to be over in the logical place according to the HTML code. If, on the other hand, we've set, let's set the item child, the nth child to 1, right? We saw the background, nothing has shifted except for for the color combinations because that's the nth child. But if we set this order to 1 instead of -1, then that element shows up at the end of the list. So there are 3 values associated with order: -1, 0, and 1. -1 means that it's first, 0 means that it's where you expect it to be in the order of which it appears in the HTML code, and 1 means that it shows up at the end of the set of items. The flex grow property specifies how big an item will be in relationship to the other elements within that group. So we see again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as our items. Our parent is set to flex. The item itself is set to auto, so the space is going to be filled with the number of items that we have there. But again, we're going to be using the nth child, and this time we're setting the value of the nth child around this flex grow property. And what you see here, this is a little funky here. Let's change this to black. What we see here is that the 4th child is twice as big because the flex grow property is set to 2. If it was set to 1, it would be the same size as all of the other elements. But since it's set to 2, it's twice the size of those other elements. 3, it would be 3 times the size of those other elements. So the flex grow property is a very easy way to make one element stand out. And of course, you can do this like on a rollover state. When you roll over a navigation link, that element gets bigger and it makes it jump out more for the user. The flex shrink property is just the opposite of that. If you set, for example, here, we set the flex shrink, and again, I'm going to change this color so it's easier to see. We see that the second item has the flex shrink set to 3. That means it's 1/3, or it's 3 times smaller. Let's think of it that way. It's shrunk to 3. It's shrunk 3 times, so it's 3 times smaller than those other elements. So that's the flex shrink property. The flex basis property is a little bit more complicated. The flex basis allows you to take an item within a list of items, and again, we're going to be using the nth child method to determine which item, and set that as the default amount of space that that one element needs, and all of the other elements are using the flex value of auto, and they're splitting the rest of that space. So if you say, well, I want, this particular image or this item in my navigations system to take up 30%, then you set the flex basis of that element to 30%, and everything else will just be splitting the rest of the space available. The last property we're going to look at is the align self property. It allows you to override the align items value for specific flex items. So as we can see here, the parent has a height set for this container of 200 pixels. Its display property is set to flex, and the align items is set to center. But we notice that the second item doesn't obey that rule because of the fact that the second item is using the nth child, and we're saying instead of align items, we're saying align self flex start. So for that second child, it's saying, okay, I'm the second child. The align items rule is telling me I should be in the center, but since I am the second child, I can use the align self rule to override that, and that's what we're doing in that example there. Now that we've been exposed to those basic flex rules, let's go back and take a look at what we need to do for our final project. You're going to create a project proposal that has a summary, an information architecture diagram, and a visual preliminary visualization of the site that you want to build. Now you can see I've provided you links for those resources over here, and for this week you're just creating a one-page HTML project proposal. I'm going to go to the next page here, and we're going to take a look at the specifics. So you're going to create an HTML page using a multi-column layout approach based on the techniques introduced in this class materials. Now, this video here walks you through all of that, but it's important for you to keep in mind the HTML tags that you need to use. You need a header, you need a navigation system, you need then 3 columns. So you're going to be using these rules: main, header, nav, section, article, aside, and footer. And you're going to need to make sure that your CSS file has these rules again. Now, I've provided several code pens as a template for the final project. This one here that I'm going to click on takes you to some code that you can use as the basis of your project summary, project proposal. Okay? So you can copy the HTML and you can copy the CSS onto your computer, set them into a folder as per the instructions that are here. You want to write your final project proposal. Make sure that you use those tools that are listed here, the word cloud, the draw.io. All of that is shown in this video up over here. If I go to my Phoenix Code editor here, you'll see here's my module 12. I've already gotten some assets from my experiments with thinking about what I want my final project to be about. I've also got my word cloud and I've got my schema. The word cloud is from the second tool that I indicate over here, and the schema is from this tool that I indicate over here, draw.io. So as you can see, I've got multiple columns that I'm creating here, and that's why the use of this multi-column template should help you out. Now, you have to make sure that you use this as the basis of your project, but that you own the process. You don't want to hand in something that says link 1, link 2, link 3, link 4, link 5. You have to have a project proposal that's telling me what your final project's going to be about. So all of the content in this template should be modified by you so you show what your final project's going to be about. As long as you utilize this video up here and the instructions in the page that talk about the HTML and the CSS that you need to use, as long as you come up with an idea for a project, then you should be good to go.